Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this policy dialogue, which is organised by the EPC in cooperation with the International Centre for Policy Studies, which is a think tank based in Kiev. We have a stellar panel with us today to discuss the topic of reconstruction and recovery in Ukraine, a very important topic. So I'm going to introduce very briefly the panelists. Yehor Kiyan, who is a researcher at ICPS, Viola von Cramon-Taubadel, who's a member of the European Parliament from the Green Party, Ambassador William Taylor, who is the former US ambassador to Ukraine, Oleksiy Zhmerenetsky, member of the Ukrainian Parliament for the Servant of the People Party, Oleksandr Sushko, Executive Director of the International Renaissance Foundation in Kiev, Agiya Zagrebelska, Head of the National Agency on Corruption Prevention, Sanctions Department, and last but not least, Melnykovska, who is Assistant Professor in Political Science at the Central European University. So we have a big panel and 60 minutes to hear them in. So I'm just going to make a few introductory comments, so we're going to get straight into it, just about the topic. I think it's fair to say that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has reduced many parts of the country to rubble. I mean, when we look at the estimated losses, they're currently, about 750 billion. I mean, this is huge. And every day that this war goes on, the cost will continue to rise. Now, reconstruction and recovery offers Ukraine an opportunity to remake itself and emerge as a stronger, greener, and more sustainable and resilient country. I mean, some urgent reconstruction can already start to be done. I mean, bridges, bomb shelters in schools, and such, despite the war. But when we look at the bigger picture, there needs to be a big picture on how major construction will be organized, how it's going to be administered and financed. And it's clear that this process needs to be inclusive, it needs to be multi-stakeholder. This means civil society, business, regional actors, citizens, as well as the international donors. And of course, it needs to be done in a transparent and accountable way. And an environment must be created in Ukraine within which businesses and companies have the confidence to come back and invest in the country. And this is crucial for Ukraine's future. So in this discussion, we want to really focus on a few key issues, mainly the structure, the donors and the administration, and the sustainability, as well as anti-corruption management. So I want to start this conversation with my colleague from ICPS, Yehor, who is going to briefly present the main points and conclusions of a recent researcher paper on this topic. So I'm going to hand the floor immediately to you, Yehor.
Dear Amanda, thank you for giving me the floor. So I will go quickly through the main points of our research, and so I will start. So actually, while doing the research, we have analyzed many points, many cases of different reconstructions in many countries. We tried to analyze and search for sources, possible sources, and we tried to give some recommendations on how to rebuild and reconstruct Ukraine. However, unfortunately, we have some positive and negative points to mention here about. So the first point, and it's rather negative, is that actually almost 1 year has passed, and since the 24th of February, and actually we still, there is no clarity regarding how to rebuild Ukraine. So while analyzing some historical cases of reconstruction of different countries, actually we analyzed many of them. However, we still think that the closest one and the most suitable for Ukraine, there are several cases, and among them is a case of European Agency for Reconstruction that took place and have conducted reconstruction in Kosovo, Serbia, Montenegro, and former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. However, even though it is a good case, but it is somehow an outdated case. Another one is the case of Special State Agency of Reconstruction and Development of Ukraine. So actually, this agency was headed by the EBRD, and this case was rather successful, and this case took place in Chernobyl. So, however, still this case has some kind of little focus. And of course, in Ukrainian case, we have to broaden and to apply some kind of unique approach. Moreover, to mention that while analyzing some kind of historical cases, I cannot say that we just can simply copy paste one case and apply it to Ukrainian case. First, I must mention that the war in Ukraine is not over. And this is the main point. So while analyzing the reconstruction in other countries, the war was over there. But in Ukraine, the war is still going on. However, I would like to emphasize that even though the war is going on in Ukraine, there is a need to rebuild Ukraine now. So firstly, while we have such kind of difficult situation, we should not lose some time for preparation of all necessary political, legal, administrative, and financial mechanisms, so that when the situation allows, we immediately start the reconstruction. So currently, the losses from war are estimated around $7 billion and $700 billion. And I would like to mention that the number will raise with the time lost, because there are some assets that just need, for example, some little reconstruction. And while there is time going on, the assets, they just lose their value. That is why this is the first point to start reconstruction as fast as possible. Also, we must understand that there are some kind of business perspectives, hopes, and expectations regarding the future. And these expectations shouldn't be wasted. And also, there is possibility to start reconstruction in the areas not nearby the front line. And this is the main point to mention here. While analyzing the different sources of reconstruction, we have searched the data, and we see that almost $51 billion was raised from various sources. However, even though this number seems a little bit impressive, this funding is not enough. Here, I must mention that we can divide this funding into several categories. And as for external funding, I would like to mention that it is still limited. I would like to mention that 60% of external funding comes in form of loans. And this means that public debt may reach 106% of GDP in the year 2023, and it imposes some kind of risk of default. Also, when we talk about internal funding, I would like to mention that printing hryvnia has constituted almost 40% of all sources of funding. So we see here that external funding is not enough, and we still print hryvnia, and it causes inflation and it poses additional risk for future development. And of course, the third source is frozen assets. Even though the number of assets, of frozen assets, is being estimated at the level of 300 billion, still it is a problem to receive them. It is a problem to identify this kind of resources. There is a number of legal complications, and the court processes will take a lot of time to for us to receive this money. So we need to search for some kind of additional funds to start the rebuilding of Ukraine and reconstruction of Ukraine as fast as possible. So in our research, we try to analyze the points of searching for private and foreign capital. So I must mention here that there should be some kind of guarantees for private sector investments, public-private partnership, and there should be created some kind of incentives for private sector, and there should be some kind of insurance. Also, in the research, we analyze the voluntary contributions. We must understand that the resources of big corporations and rich individuals, they are comparable to the budgets of some countries. But to receive these contributions, there should be some kind of a system so that we can conclude some kind of agreements, and this process should be as transparent as possible. And also we have analyzed the problem of sanctioned assets. So actually, we have estimated that around 70 billion of euros of private funds are sanctioned and frozen. And even though it will be difficult to get these funds quickly, there should be possibility to get funds from personalities who do not support Russian invasion, who do not pay taxes to Russian budget, and won't substantially help Ukraine with financial contributions. However, there should be created some kind of practical guidelines how to proceed with such kind of contributions, and these practical guidelines should be agreed with Ukraine and both with the government and Ukrainian society, so that these guidelines should be implemented only on a wider consensus in the country and with politically, legally, and morally acceptable terms. And in turn, without additional coverage, discussion, consensus, some kind of safeguards, and without public control and appropriate agreement in the Ukrainian society, such an idea shouldn't be accepted. In addition, in our paper, we gave some kind of recommendations regarding reconstruction processes, and we see that any reconstruction plan can be successful only if it is based on well-prepared and elaborated phases of planning, organization, management, and control. So we have provided the detailed points in our research, and just not to spend a lot of time explaining it, you can get acquainted with our research on our website, ICPS.com.ua. So if you have time, please, you can visit our website and see the research there. So thank you for your attention. These were the main points I wanted to give an emphasis on.
All right, thank you, Yehor. I mean, you raised a lot of important points that we can come back to, including the issue of finance, frozen assets, and the different formats. But I want to give the floor now to Oleksiy, because you mentioned that this is necessary to start this process of reconstruction as soon as possible, that we shouldn't be hanging around waiting until the end of the war. So I'd like to ask you, Oleksiy, I mean, the reconstruction process, I mean, the political importance of this for the Ukrainian population. I mean, how is this seen? I mean, what does it mean? How is it important for people to see this process already starting?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. First of all, I want to thank ICPS for your work, this research and this presentation. Today, when we are still at war, it's very important to forecast and plan recovery. In the parliament, we created the Interfractional Association, Strategic Foresight for Ukraine, and with UNDP and British Parliament did the study of post-war reconstruction scenarios. And in 4 scenarios, what we get, we see some risk and some benefits, but your research provides universal advice, or some universal pill that will be useful in any future scenario, what we get. And I want to highlight several key conclusions from your research, which I guess are important for Ukraine. First of all, reconstruction does not need to be postponed for later. The Ukrainian army liberated a large number of territories that are suffering significant destruction, in particular in Kyiv and Chernihiv region, which today are not under shelling and can be rebuilt. And this will be a clear signal to the partners, from the partners, that the Western world believes in the victory of Ukraine and consolidates on the restoration of Ukraine territories. The second, we need to clarify and define the acceptable mechanism to financing the restoration. I know that there are discussions on this issue today, but it's time to finalize them and start testing different options on different territories, for example, on restored territories, which I mentioned earlier. And the third, I would like to draw your attention to the topic of confiscation of private assets of sanctioned citizens of Russia. As we can see from your study, the total amount of such assets is huge and comparable to the assets of the Russian state. And it's important to develop and approve a clean mechanism of transferring these assets to Ukraine as reparations and in adequate amount. A small percentage of these transferred assets should not be an indulgence of the lifting of sanctions from these Russian citizens connected with Russian regime. I think it's my key findings or takeaways from this research. Thank you.
Thank you, and your comments on the frozen assets, link very well to bring in Agiya at this point. But just before I give the floor to you, I want to just remind to the audience that they can put their questions and their comments either by clicking on the raising hand icon, and then you can speak to our speakers, or you can also put them in the Q&A box. And as we only have 1 hour for this discussion, it would be great if you could already start to do this, so I can feed these questions already through to the speakers. But now I want to come to you, Agiya, because this is an area that you're working on, and as was just mentioned by Oleksiy, we need to find a way to use, frozen assets to help rebuild Ukraine. So it'd be great if you could share your views on this, how best this could be done, and how much money are we actually talking about?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for this meeting and for your research. It's very important for Ukrainian people. And I understand that for all of us today discussing the issue of financing the reconstruction, it's about law and procedures. For the Ukrainian people, it's primarily about hope, it's about faith and justice. Understanding that the issue of reconstruction is one of the priorities for our partners give us the strength and morale to continue to fight for peace for the whole world and fundamental human values. We understand the challenges faced by the legal system of our partners in confiscating Russian assets and channeling the procedures to rebuild Ukraine. There are several different ideas on how this can be done and differences between countries regarding support. Today, I would like to focus on the procedure of voluntary forfeiture or contributions of sanctions persons. We support this procedure, but several important aspects should be considered. First, the funds ultimately go to the Ukrainian budget. I think that it's a very important point for us. Secondly, the voluntary consent of the sanctioned person to such a procedure should not entail releasing such a person from liability for the crimes committed. It should not be a sufficient basis for reviewing the sanctions imposed. Today's case Abramovich, considered by the European Commission, is an excellent opportunity to work out an effective mechanism in this direction. And the third and most important thing, I would like to urge us all to do this as fast as possible. The sooner we start this process, the more Ukrainians will return to their home, have jobs, and be able to contribute to the restoration of Ukraine's economic health and reforms. It's very important for reforms. We will need to return our people. And the reconstruction images will be another powerful signal to Assyrian actors worldwide that democracies are resilient in 21st century and are winning. If it will be good finishing, 3 main points. First, the funds should ultimately go to the Ukrainian budget. Second, it's about sanctioned person. Voluntary consent should not be a reason for liability from the crimes committed, or should not be sufficient basis for reviewing the sanctions what was imposed now. And third is speed. We need to do this as fast as possible, how said before me many speakers. And I repeat, I thank you for your research and thank you for this meeting, and I can answer for questions if they will be.
All right, thank you, Agiya. And to continue this conversation, I would like to turn now to you, Oleksandr, to hear your views on not only this issue of using frozen assets, but also on how you view the administration of a reconstruction. And the last point as well, because you're coming from civil society, I mean, civil society must have a crucial role in this process. I mean, they should be there at every meeting, whether it's a large conference or a small meeting, at a national level, at a local level. So how do you view the role of civil society, the important role that it should be playing in the reconstruction of Ukraine?
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, everyone. And this is really relevant questions when it comes to the participation of the civil society, not only in Ukraine, but also in other countries of Europe and world. And here we are in the process to build a kind of system, a network, because we are all facing the risk now to see some fragmented efforts by various actors which are trying to find the place for themselves. But at the same time, there is still a shortage of systemic efforts to find the proper place and role of the civil society actors in the whole system of recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine. First of all, your first question was regarding administration. And I know that this is a significant efforts are being done now on the level of international donors and also Ukrainian government to agree on a certain model, which is aimed at including transparent and inclusive approach, which will generate sufficient trust for international donors in order to invest their money. And one of the prerequisites of this inclusive and transparent and accountable approach to administration is exactly a proper participation of the civil society. When we talk about civil society, traditionally we say mostly about the civil control. But in this case, I would not say only on the control function. It is not the only, probably not the main one. Because what we have in the core is a huge potential of Ukrainian civil society actors to participate in all the elements of recovery planning, recovery implementation, recovery communication, and then certainly control. And our foundation here in Ukraine is engaged quite closely with a variety of civil society actors, starting from the very local, very municipal level, community level actors, which are willing to take part in elaboration of this vision and the plans of recovery. And certainly any legitimate approach should take them into account, because what we have at risk, so we have the risk of centralization when somebody in the central government will decide instead of the local communities what they have to build or to rebuild. And then in the end, if this risks is real, we will face real threat of disconnection of the recovery policy from the real needs of the local communities. And so this risk can be overcome through the proper participation of the local civil society actors. Then on the higher level, on the level of big regions and on the national level, we have already coalitions, groups and networks of civil society organizations and individual actors, experts, freelancers, whatever, different participants who are ready to contribute with their knowledge, with their expertise. And here Ukraine is really have a significant potential of various professionals on the ground. Most of them are not in the governmental sector. Most of them are either in business or in the civil society. And the success of any viable recovery policy will strongly depend on how and if and how these actors will be engaged. And certainly there is already lots of examples which we see on the ground, both negative and positive. I mean, the negative, when, for example, somebody, as I mentioned, decides for the local communities without their participation. And the positive, when we see the dialogue between the civil society networks and the administration and the government. Especially, I mean, a lot of people with knowledge on urbanism, how to build new cities. So we do not need just to restore what has been destroyed. So recovery is not about restoring what we had in the past. So this is certainly, the war is a tragic event, but at the same time, it now gives us a chance to build something which is fundamentally different from that post-Soviet kind of urbanism. So here we already have the groups of civil society experts, some urbanist coalitions, people working with the small and medium businesses across the country, which have not just ambitious, not just their claim to be there. So this is not a fight for the seat at the table. This is a fight for real participation, and they are ready to bring their ideas. And so this is, I think that this is both the challenge and the opportunity for us all. So I just have to remind the statement of the Ursula von der Leyen in Lugano last July, when she explicitly said that participation of the civil society is crucial for any successful recovery on Ukraine. And I hope that certainly we will have lots of discussion on the practical measures. So there is still the issue of this is lots of things to debate. But what we have to agree principally that there will be no steps ahead without the civil society. There will be no decision without local communities on the recovery of those communities. And there will be no spending of money without accountable model of planning, competition, opportunity to submit projects, competition between the public competition between different ideas. So this is really the chance for Ukraine, not just to revive, but also to develop new culture of participation, a new model of engagement of the civil society in this highly, highly important work. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleksandr. I mean, you raised a lot of really great points there. I'm also writing a paper at the moment on the role of Ukrainian civil society in the reconstruction. So I agree with everything you say. And from, I mean, a historical perspective, I mean, civil society has always been a positive force for change in Ukraine. So they should be engaged in every single step of this journey. But I want to turn now to you, Viola, to get the views, to get your views. I mean, first of all, on how you see, you know, the role of the EU in this process, but also to look at how Ukraine can best, you know, bring the confidence of Western donors. I mean, would this be through, obviously through the reform process? I mean, this is going to be crucial, steps to further strengthen anti-corruption measures and whatnot. So the reconstruction process should go hand in hand with Ukraine's accession process or the reform process. Would that be the right way to look at it? I mean, how do you view this and some of the main challenges that have been raised?
Yeah, thank you so much, Amanda, and thanks for this great opportunity to speak about the questions where Yehor and Oleksiy have already said that it's important to speak about that now, even the war is still going on in a very bloody way. And Oleksandr now has raised a lot of the crucial questions where at least we here on the European level speak about, debate about, and where we think this needs to be one pillar, one crucial factor when we speak about reconstruction and recovery. I mean, first of all, and that is clear, I think also President Zelensky has mentioned that not everything which needs to be rebuilt and reconstructed will be financed by public finance or public money. I mean, we have to find also, and we have to attract private money in a way which has a considerable amount. No matter whether this is public or private money or confiscated money, we have to make sure that the institutional framework is, as Oleksandr has said before, is credible and people can be kept accountable. For that, in the past, Ukraine had done a lot. I mean, after Maidan, Ukraine had worked out a really astonishing, let's say, institutional framework for anti-corruption, procurement, digital procurement, and so on. So in that respect, Ukraine has shown to the world that they can do it and that they can be a role model for many of these reforms which are needed now for the next step. Coming from the EU side, I think the EU has shown that we have a genuine interest in being the first and the closest partner when it comes to the reconstruction phase, granting Ukraine the candidate status. Mean we have a genuine interest that we, together with Ukraine, together with the elected government, elected representative, but also with the civil society, and everyone else who has an interest in Ukraine will achieve this joint effort and will make sure that the level of corruption is as low as possible, that what Oleksandr has mentioned, the level of participation is as high as possible. And coming from the green side of the political arena, we can also hopefully integrate all the climate and environmental goals. I mean, if we start from the scratch, and in many regions we have to start from the scratch, let's do it in the most sustainable way. And let's start with circular economy. Let's see what we can still use. Let's see what progressive architect association have already proposed in some of the concept. I mean, this could be really like a test, like a laboratory for many people, for small and medium enterprises, for environmental activists, but also for some new sources for energy generating and so on. So I see that if we do it rightly, Ukraine could really benefit and prosperous from this at the moment very desperate and very difficult situation. But we see in the past, Ukraine has always been the trendsetter when it comes to innovative ideas, technology advantage, digital solutions, and so on. And putting this all together with as Oleksandr has said, with a decentralized approach, giving also a lot of responsibility to those people who know exactly what is needed on the ground when it comes to living areas, commercial, commercial areas, but also how to attract SMEs to Ukraine domestically, but also internationally. Really live this decentralization structures which we had in the past in Ukraine. I'm actually very optimistic that it can be a success story, a success story from different sides, a success story that whoever will invest into Ukraine will have a huge return on investment, but also will see that people will return. At the moment, we see that more than 8 people had to leave Ukraine. And many of them, the longer the war takes, consider maybe not to return, and this would be sad. So we need to create an environment, a political and a business and an economical environment, financial environment, where people think, yes, it's better to go back and to build something at home to contribute to my reconstruction or to reconstruct my country than staying in one of the host countries. Even I know that Germany and many others do a lot to integrate some of the Ukrainians who are highly educated in our societies, but this will be an interesting decision then for many people to make, whether they will return and be part of this reconstruction. But as Oleksandr has said, we need to make sure that people can decide on things which can be decided on the spot, on the ground, on the local level, on the municipal level. And for that, I see that Ukraine had done a lot in the past, and we need to make sure that those structures can be reanimated and reviewed and can be used again. My husband has just started drafting something about on agriculture. I mean, agriculture alone has been affected heavily by the war, while Russia has seen that Ukraine as the main competitors in terms of grain production, in terms of agriculture good production, they wanted to destroy Ukraine as such. So for that, I guess we need also a particular program, but also a lot of private investment, while Ukraine is crucial, not just for domestic reason, but also for the global consumption and for the global supply of grain. So sectors like agriculture and other strategic sectors, I think this can, of course, not just be done on the local level. For this, you need a strategic concept from the European, but also from the national side. This would be maybe my small contribution. I can go more into details, but I would like to leave it for now. Thank you, Amanda.
No, thank you, Viola. This is great. I mean, decentralization reform in Ukraine was one of the most successful reforms they ever did, which has obviously allowed local actors to have a real voice. So it is crucially important that decentralization, doesn't become more centralized again, if I can put it that way, as was mentioned by Oleksandr as well. And I agree with you as well, your point on agriculture. But I mean, I think one of the other challenges for agriculture is going to be related to landmines, because I mean, the Russians purposely have found hundreds of thousands of landmines on agricultural land.
True.
And it can take a long time to remove.
And maybe, sorry, I forgot about, I had it in my note. I just returned from Bosnia. In Bosnia, since '96, we are doing the cleaning of landmines. And in the most optimistic way, we will finish by 37, so 41 years. And I mean, Bosnia from the sheer size is much smaller than Ukraine. So absolutely right. Sorry, Amanda, I forgot to mention this. Demining is a process which should start immediately. And I think that many of the member states had started, but we need it in a much more intense and systematic way than we have done during the last month. Sorry, I forgot that. True.
No, it's fine. Thank you. And I want to turn to you, Ambassador Taylor, to get your take on some of these issues. I mean, we've heard that Ukraine needs to create an attractive in a climate to attract investment. So does this mean that they should be, prioritizing specific reforms? I mean, strengthening governance, accountability, doing more on anti-corruption in order to facilitate this process? And how do you see the role of the United States? I mean, is the United States going to give Ukraine a multi-million-dollar, gift to get into the Reconstruction Fund? How do you see things?
Amanda, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here, join this panel, and to read this good report that ICPS has put together. So, and I've just got 4 points somewhat related, Amanda, to your question just now. First of all, on the U.S. role, Viola just mentioned that the EU is the first partner in Reconstruction. Very, very welcome. Very welcome, that is. The United States, of course, has been the first partner on security, and will continue to do that. Security, I think we have to keep in mind that private sector investment, public sector investment depends on there being security in the area. And as people have pointed out, I think Yehor pointed out, there is security in some parts of the country right now, so that's not an excuse to wait, but there needs to be ongoing security and a security guarantee for Ukraine after the victory, so that the Russians cannot invade again. So the United States will clearly be the first partner there. On the organization, which Oleksiy raised as well, this is important, and we haven't gotten started yet. Yehor mentioned this as well. The G7 made some statements and some promises, and I haven't seen the establishment of this platform that they talked about, which in turn has to be partnered with the government of Ukraine at all levels. Civil society is really important, as Oleksiy has pointed out, as Oleksandr just pointed out as well. But the G7 needs to get started on that to identify elected appointed individuals to be part of that platform. On the finance, I'm impressed with the search for other sources of revenue, and that's important to do. But as Yehor has pointed out, they take time. They take time. I'm also impressed with the 300 billion, this famous 300 billion that is frozen in G7 banks. Yes, there are issues about how to go about that, but in the United States, there is a debate on how to go about that, and it may take legislation. That's okay. In the United States right now, there is bipartisan support for Ukraine, bipartisan opposition to the Russian aggression, invasion. There will be bipartisan support for legislation that allows us, at least in the United States, to take those frozen assets and seize them and put them into an international fund for reconstruction, an international fund for reconstruction and for ongoing operations. I mean, as people have pointed out, the government of Ukraine needs ongoing funds to keep the government going, to pay the soldiers, to pay the healthcare workers, to pay the police. This is important to be able to move forward. And so that 300 billion seems to me, and there's some 40 billion in the United States. There are another 40 billion in other G7 nations that can add up to 300 billion. That's a good start to the 750 billion that people are talking about. My last point is, again, I was pleased that Viola is on the first partner. EU membership is so important for Ukraine, and it's such a motivating factor that those conditions, those 7 conditions that there are, or others that are already out there, that the government has already made some progress toward achieving, those 7 conditions ought to be the conditions. If donors are going to put any conditions on their funds, make those EU membership conditions the requirements in order to unleash and to keep the flow of assistance coming. That is, each donor should not have its own set of conditions. If we can all unite on the EU membership criteria and conditions, that would facilitate that and provide the incentive for the Ukrainians to do the hard things. There's no doubt these are hard steps to take. They've made great progress, are making good progress to continue, and need incentives, and these are the way to do that. Amanda, thank you very much for letting me talk.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And that was a great idea about having these same criteria to be met by donors as well. I think that could be something that definitely could fly. But Ukraine needs to, put the foot on the accelerator as well, and make the final steps to actually meet these 7 criteria and meet them, 100% properly. Not 99%, but 100%. I know they can do it. I know Ukrainians, they definitely can. So I want to come to you, Ina, last but not least. And I want to ask you about the needs of Ukrainian companies in the country today, because there's still companies function in Ukraine. What sort of support do they need to sustain their resilience and to increase their resilience as part of this, process of reconstruction and recovery? Because Ukraine needs to keep its businesses alive and functioning for the exact reasons that, Ambassador Taylor just mentioned. The economy needs to stay afloat.
Thank you, Amanda, for this very good question. And I also congratulate the authors at ICPS for this very interesting study. So indeed, I would like to add this perspective of Ukrainian business to the discussion on reconstruction, and to say that this war is fought on different areas, battlefields, and one of these battlefields is of course economy. And so as we saw remarkable resilience of Ukrainian army, we also should acknowledge remarkable corporate resilience in Ukraine in the recent year. And this resilience should inform, because it kind of illustrates what kind of needs, what kind of patterns in business behavior can be observed at the moment. And so these needs need to inform, to be taken into account by reconstruction efforts. Business resilience of Ukrainian corporate world is very people-centric, what already to a certain extent mentioned in the study. It means that there is a kind of big social component, and it seems that Ukrainian commercial, usually very narrow profit-oriented interest aligned with national or interest, and instead of a kind of making money, Ukrainian companies increasingly try to help national state in provision of public goods, supporting local communities, army, and state institutions. This strategy is, however, very costly. So on the one side, it means also that we see a kind of coming out of assets that were hidden in the shadow economy in Ukraine that is estimated in pre-war times up to 40%. But nevertheless, these kind of assets, even if they will be taken out of the shadow economy, will not be sufficient and cannot sustain and cover the needs for long. So this means also that certain advantages that Ukrainian business benefited from in the past are not available anymore, or would not be available anymore very in the near future. And one of these advantages is a kind of labor, cheap labor costs. So what we observe at the moment that companies try to kind of already to compensate now for this diminishing of this labor related advancement, and they try to introduce technologies to make their production processes more efficient. So reconstruction should be not only about transfer of money, but also about transfer of technologies and modernization of Ukrainian economy. And this, of course, means that we need actually to dig deeper into how this transfer can happen, what kind of ownership structure modernization it would take as a follow-up, which sectors of pre-war, very legacy-based Ukrainian economy probably need to be a kind of left in the past and not reconstructed at all. So this kind of modernization component need to be very high on the agenda of reconstruction. The second point is about that, of course, this would mean that capital inflows are necessary. And I like that the authors of this study discuss not only state or a kind of international donors related capital inflows, but also try to kind of elaborate about on potential of private capital inflows, and look at the private actors beyond this usual picture of good and evil, saying that these are just a kind of business actors and their behavior could be constrained or incentivized by certain regulations. And so I think that this is probably a good idea to incentivize them to kind of to provide money for Ukraine reconstruction, but at the same time, we also need to think more long-term, not to allow that this incentive would be a sort of one-time buyout and then their bad behavior will continue, but that there will be some incentives for them or constraints that would kind of make their businesses more transparent and more open to regulations and kind of international standards. And at the same time, to a certain extent, it seems that the authors try to make the trade-off. Either we have incentives of unfreezing their assets and kind of redirecting these assets to Ukraine's reconstruction, or there will be a kind of sanctions and seizing of their frozen assets. I think that these two instruments could be well combined, and we have previous experiences where we have a sort of amnesty offer it for a certain period of time, but if there is, if this amnesty offer is not taken, then certain sanctions in terms of seizing the assets or whatever could be introduced. And having this mechanism, well-elaborated mechanism of punishment would make just the offer more credible and more attractive. Another point is that business actually welcomes this kind of inflows of capital, but the fears are that these inflows will be a sort of one-time aid and they are not sustainable. So what business needs are not only aid, either in form of loans or grants, but rather deals and doing business. And so this is on the side of international community, in particular the European Union, that Ukrainian corporates will get this opportunity to make deals to integrate as soon as possible into European single market. So while we have a kind of different discussion about Ukrainian political integration, we need to accelerate integration of Ukrainian businesses into EU markets and eventually also adapt the procedures that are necessary, especially related to non-tariff barriers and certification to the context of war, so that Ukraine can fulfill these procedures as soon as possible. And probably the last point is about beyond the necessity of hard security guarantees, capital inflows from outside would need to have security of property rights, security of effective rule of law. And of course, EU integration process could be incentive to accelerate this kind of process, the establishment of these rules, but nevertheless, it would not be something that will happen overnight. You will need time, and at the same time, capital inflows are needed already now. So eventually, this is also the European Union and international donors who could kind of share the risk of this insecurity of property rights, or a kind of provide certain security guarantees, insurance guarantees for investment and trade with Ukraine. And we have actually certain mechanism already in place historically that could be applied to the case of Ukraine. So what I mean that institution building in this case, in the case of Ukraine's reconstruction, is not only a kind of the work that should be done in Ukraine, but it's also something that can be a kind of, it's also homework for the EU and international community itself. Thanks.
Thank you, Ina. You raised many great points there, and I definitely agree on the need for Ukraine's, closer economic integration with the EU. And I think this is something that actually made a lot of progress at the last EU-Ukraine summit. I mean, when they made some advantages in a number of areas, including taking Ukraine forwards towards the EU's internal market. I mean, the quicker that the EU would be part of the internal market, I mean, that's the first step towards becoming a full member, to be honest. So I think this would be a positive development. I'm aware we only have a few minutes left, so I want to put the questions that are in the box, and I also want to give Yehor a chance to very rapidly reply to anything you might have heard. So I want to put the first question, which is to you, Oleksiy. I hope you're still with us. That was from Paula Tama, who's from Politico, and she had the question about how could Ukraine's allies legally transfer ownership of frozen assets to Ukraine, as this is not possible. under the current sanctions regime. I know that Ambassador Taylor touched on this, but I don't know if you want to add something. If you're still there. Oh, he left. All right. So okay, then we'll move on to the next question unless somebody else wants to say something on this. I think the other two questions in the box are more or less on the same issue. It's about it's about reconstruction and the priority of keeping Ukraine's infrastructure functioning and making it resilient, and what would be the immediate needs in response in this regard. I mean, for example, when we come to rockets being launched by Russia onto infrastructure in Ukraine, I mean, how can this resilience be best strengthened in the short term? And also, how can the resilience in terms of double transition, climate neutrality in Ukraine going in terms of digital infrastructure be ensured? I don't know who would like to pick up on that question.
I can probably start about actually how the infrastructure should be shaped, yes, which rationale in mind, first of all, and it's not only a kind of shelling of Russian bombs, which I think you need a kind of good security and military capacities to be protected, and it would not make many sense to a kind of to do underground facilities or underground infrastructure, as I expect these capacities would be limited. But what one need to take into account is connectivity. So infrastructure is built to connect and not to isolate one or another country from the world. And so until now, we have a kind of Ukrainian infrastructure that, due to Soviet legacies, was rather directed towards Russia or post-Soviet space. At the moment, we kind of see that this is the opportunity to reshape this Ukrainian infrastructure and make it more connected to the EU. So one kind of need have this rationale in mind when building this reconstruction infrastructure plans. Yeah.
Thank you, Ina. We have a question here for you, Viola, from Andrei Dadiani, who's asking about the childcare institutions, orphanages in Ukraine. I mean, how can they be best replaced in the process of reconstruction? Because, you know, as I think is quite well known, some of these orphanages were not in the best state prior to the war.
Yeah, that's true. But also there was a transformation going on. And the more, let's say, we could rely on decentralized structures, the more there was responsibility from the local communities. They could generate taxes and money, and taking care of that, the better it became. So actually, I visited some of the regions where the former administrative boundary was, so to say, and there were many of the orphan houses, and actually there was some investment going on. The local and the national government understood that they have to invest also in those kids. Now we have a complete different situation. We are in an emergency situation, but I do hope that the potential of the human factor is even valued higher than before the war, so that really the government has to take care of each and everyone who needs psychological but also physical support, who needs special treatment after the war, and so on and so forth. And there I see that a lot of people, be it from the former Western Balkan wars, but also from the Western countries, are ready to step in, to help, to support, to advise, and to train the trainers, so to say, when it comes to either orphan houses, but also how to say this, when the family takes over the care of an orphan. So also there to go for, let's say, new approaches and new concepts, maybe not so much in an orphan house, but also families who would take a child into their families. But in that respect, I have no, let's say, details on how we're going to organize that, but I'm also there pretty optimistic that civil society plus European specialist experts are very much aware of the situation and will help as much as they can to reconstruct that in a more modern, in a more updated way than it was in the past.
Thank you. I'm aware that we've run out of time. So I just want to give you, Yehor, the opportunity if you want to have the last word for ICPS. I mean, as we were discussing to a large extent, the points that you made in your report.
Actually, today's discussion was really well grounded, and everyone was providing some kind of really good issues, good points. And of course, we are not pretending that our research fully covers everyone's question, everyone's points, because the main idea was to get the general points. And today we have rounded some of them points. But I would like also to answer some issues that were raised in the questions here. I see the questions about democratic resilience, about some kind of institutions. I would like to mention that also the country has made a lot of progress on these issues. So also there is, of course, it is really difficult to define the level of perfection, some kind of level of projections for them, but still the country is making some kind of changes. And of course, we need more legal changes, we need more monitoring, we need to avoid monopolies, and of course, we need public control. This is the main point also to emphasize after today's discussion, because of course there will be some kind of blind spots and we need public control. We need to support civil society organizations so that these blind spots are covered, and also the discussions are broadened. And of course, for example, there was a question about some kind of institutions, Ukrainian institutions, and I'd like to on example of the ICPS to tell the successful case of monitoring and public control. For example, we had a project on transparency and democratic resilience of key state institutions. And this project has a great success because institutions try to modernize, they try to adapt, some kind of views, they try to adopt some kind of recommendations we are given to them, so that we see that civil society, the government, they should work together to achieve better results. And I hope that we will have more meetings, more dialogue, and more discussions in the future, so that we can broaden our researches and work together to give proper recommendations and achieve better results. Thank you,
Yehor. It only remains for me to thank all of you for joining us here today. A big thanks to all of our speakers. I mean, you've all given, excellent interventions and expertise on this topic. So thank you so much. Thank you to the audience. This is a really important topic, reconstruction and recovery of Ukraine. I mean, it's not only going to be brilliant for Ukraine, but also brilliant for Europe, because a stronger Ukraine equals a stronger Europe. So all efforts need to be done to progress this in every way, including obviously delivering the cash. But Ukraine also needs to make sure it has the relevant environment, or prepares the environment to receive that cash. But it's a win-win for everybody. So thanks a lot to all of you. I mean, EPC will be continuing to work on this topic and many more within the framework of our Ukraine's European Future project. So I wish everybody a good afternoon or a good morning when it comes to you, Ambassador. I know it's like 6 o'clock in the morning in Washington. So thanks again for joining us, and a good remainder of the week. So thanks to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.